Hello and welcome to our Innovation and Technology Guided by Ethics Day of World Unity Week. I'm Claire Stonehouse from the Hague Center and just welcoming all of you here into this space of co-creation, transformation, and presentation and celebration for all that is unity and peace coming forth into this world. So today we are focusing on the Deep and Rapid Transformation Project. We have some amazing wise women with us today to describe that project to us. And it's around the UN Sustainable Development Goals. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres is calling all nations to up-level their commitment to these goals because we're behind schedule on meeting them. These goals for poverty, for water, for collaboration, these national goals. And so he's calling for this deep and rapid transformation needs to start to happen now, and is called the Summit of the Future at the UN September 22nd and 23rd. And so the Sustainable Development Goals Thought Leaders Group of the Evolutionary Leaders community have taken up this charge, and they're here with us today to explain what our contribution is to this important work. So today we're going to have Dr. Jude Currivan. She's a cosmologist, planetary healer, a futurist, author, and previously one of the most senior businesswomen in the UK, and now co-founder of the Whole World View. She has worked with wisdom keepers from many traditions, as well as earning a master's degree in physics from Oxford University, specializing in cosmology and quantum physics. Jude, how many lifetimes have you lived here? She has a PhD in archaeology, researching ancient languages, and also squeezing in being a group finance director of 2 major international businesses. Wow. Jude's the author of 7 nonfiction books, and latterly the Cosmic Hologram, which won the Silver Nautilus Book Award, and the Story of Gaia, which won the Gold Award. So for the last 2 decades, Jude's been traveling around the world in service of planetary and collective healing and conscious evolution, some of which is described in her other book. For all of the latest news and offerings on Jude, please visit her and subscribe to the newsletter, thewholeworldview.org. What I love about you, Jude, is your very gentle and divine wisdom. You bring incredible clarity, and bringing in this whole worldview is a deep systemic shift element in our community. So just welcome, say hello to us today, and then I'll introduce the other 2.
Thank you, Cara. As always, it's wonderful to be with everyone through World Unity Week. I remember when Ben had this idea some years ago, and he said, "What do you think?" And I said, "We got to do it. You've got to do it. We've all got to do it together." So to be here now, I think 4-5 years on, is such a great privilege and joy. So thank you, Cara. Good to be here.
And we have Heidi Sparks Guber is next in our box there. She says engaged in a lifelong study in how to create conditions that support individual and collective transformation. She has studied and worked with some of the greatest living teachers in the world, and as a consultant member of the Society for Organizational Learning. And she's been actively involved in designing and facilitating many learning journeys, including collaborations and global forums, and recently co-founded and led her own award-winning organization, the Fourth Quadrant Partners. That group has facilitated the Moonshoot movement, an all-county breakthrough initiative in grade-level literacy for children in the Indian River County, Florida. So Heidi lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico. She currently serves as design and facilitation co-lead for the CRTC, that's this Deep and Rapid Transformation process, and she's on the steering committee of the Sustainable Development Goals Synergy Circle of the Evolutionary Leaders. So Heidi, you're new to me, but when I read your bio, I thought, oh, I want to get to know you. That's amazing. So welcome, and say hello to the audience and to us.
Yes, it's just such a pleasure and a privilege to be here with this extended family. I know there are many old and new friends among the listeners, and it is such a pleasure to come here with Jude and Joni and share what we're up to now, which I know will be of interest to everybody here.
Yes, and thirdly, we have Dr. Joni Carley. Joni is an author and leadership consultant. She's Her book is The Alchemy of Power, Mastering the Invisible Factors of Leadership. She's a consultant and an ordained interspiritual minister. She's on the United Nations Economic and Social Council Committee, Economic and Social Council, and she's active in many UN committees and projects since 2007. In 2020, she was a member of the drafting committee of the UN 75 People's Declaration and Plan for Global Action. So something you might not know about Joni is that she also plays the djembe African drum. So why have we not seen this on World Unity Week yet? Joni, welcome. Play some drum us in. Yeah.
Thank you. It's awesome to be here. Really, really appreciate being here. It's a wonderful conversation. It's a wonderful week, and I welcome everyone to the week.
Super, thank you. So I'm Kara Thornhouse. I'm a mesh worker with the Hague Center, so I'll be asking the panelists some questions today, and we're gonna start with Heidi first. And I'd like you, Heidi, please introduce the project. What is this roundtable discussion research project that we're creating? And tell us a bit also about how deep and rapid transformation is different or new from just regular trying to change the world and meet the sustainable development goals in this international development context.
Right. So there are a few basic points to understand first about the evolution of the deep and rapid transformation convergence approach that we are now effectuating. The DRTC, that's what we call it for short, deep and rapid transformation convergence, comes from the evolutionary leaders SDG thought leaders circle, which came together 2 or 3 years ago to understand why the SDGs were not being achieved, and to begin to offer innovative approaches based on our own experience. The evolutionary leaders thought circle was composed of people who knew the UN well, others who were deeply immersed in articulating the unitive worldview, such as Jude, who will be with us to take us further into that. And those of us who have had deep experience in working with SDG-like initiatives in the world. One of our first actions together was to give rise to the unitive narrative that came out of a need expressed in this group in support of the new unitive cluster, which Joni will tell you about, is one of the growth of which is one of the reasons we know this is the right time. And so another that thing that we did was to learn about how the UN monitors and learns about the progress. And also we polled our own network to find out what approaches were known to have worked among these kinds of scaled initiatives in the world. The DRTC approach, Deep and Rapid Transformation approach, came about this year when we sensed a noticeable expansion and acceleration in the work and within the UN around in the world and in the UN around creating the unitive context. The DRTC approach is a dialogic one in which coherence is deepened around a unitive view of what's possible in having a world that works for everyone, with no one and nothing left out. This is distinctly different from traditional strategic planning approaches to problem solving around achieving a set of desired goals. And that traditional approach to international development has been, I think people would agree, notoriously top-down and framed as a Western approach to strategy in places that were not coherent with that. That is problem solving usually by those who knew better, coming up with a way through, including many decisions about how resources will or won't be applied, and using funding from an external patron, often well-meaning, and sometimes having their own agenda, which skews the effect in the communities that they're working in. There's general consensus in this field that that approach is not working. We need, or at least not fast enough. We need to support local agency around unique vision, local vision, commitment, and action. We need to act and learn at the speed of the change that is happening in the world, and the time to do that is now. So in the DRTC, the Deep and Rapid Transformation Convergence Approach, we have 7 sets of roundtables loosely organized in accord with the dimensions of the themes of the Pact of the Future in the Summit of the Future, so that the insights and recommendations that emerge in our process out of these dialogues will be sympathetic with the language of the UN body. In this first phase, a series of 3 roundtable conversations in each of those 7 dimensions include diverse expert and practitioners in these fields, together in the process underpinned by a unit of perspective. And in these roundtables, we share iterative experience, stories, insights around that particular dimension. And for example, Jude and I work together. Jude is the co-lead and I'm the facilitator of DRTC 3, which is economic architecture, and DRTC 5, which is science, innovation, and technology. Each of those has 20 or so individuals who are really thought leaders in their arena. All of this leads up to this. That's only the first phase. This all leads up to the second phase of the approach, which are the events into September on the UN side, in tandem with the UN General Assembly, the Summit of the Future at the UN, which are taking place, I believe, on the 22nd and 23rd, Joni, is that right, on the of September. And then on the DRTC side, our side, is a parallel set of conversations, which will take place at the Synod House of St. John the Divine on the 19th of September, a couple of days before that event. It'll be an all-day event that brings together representatives from these roundtables that are going on now, and a host of other participants, a number of whom are probably on this call right now, to hear and amplify what is being learned. The third phase, which is just as important as this first one around the UN and the SDGs as a theater of action, is what emerges beyond September and beyond the UN's SDGs at this particular, as this particular theater of action. We are in this for the long haul. You'll be hearing from us through time, accompanying this and other processes in the world, making visible, resonating with, and amplifying the unitive worldview that is showing up everywhere. Supporting it and becoming an idea whose time has come. It takes very little to have critical mass in which this becomes the context for strategy and action in the world, and what is then enacted is a whole different order of manifestation. You'll hear more about that from Jude. On one level, we are intending to create from this DRTC process what sounds like a traditional offering. Ideas, resources, shaping of the thinking of the people who are direct participants in the UN Summit of the Future, and finding synergies across these dimensions, meta themes, potentials for partnership, and so forth. But on a unitive level, which is much greater than any of the innovative solutions we might discover for the events in September and beyond, we are making this unitive worldview an idea whose time has come through generative dialogues which join and amplify the unitive field of coherence, the morphogenic field with every conversation we have that informs and provides the fertile ground for every solution we consider. Finally, I would say there are many islands of coherence already, and you know some of these, alive and well for several decades, in fact. In 1977, great systems thinkers like Bucky Fuller and Donella Meadows came together with Joan Holmes, Lynn Twist, and many more revered friends to establish the Hunger Project, which is alive and well today with deep strategic programs in South Africa, Southeast Asia, in Africa, Southeast Asia, and South America, and that are making unitive vision really realized on the ground. You can see it. If you want to see a living example of what happens when a whole nation takes on this unitive coherence, visit Bhutan, which has adopted gross national happiness instead of GDP as its organizing principle. And the criteria, most importantly to me, having just visited there, is that the criteria for validation for the approach is the Bhutanese people themselves, who are surveyed often to find out what has worked and what is next. That's why there is such happiness. The radical happiness there does not come because they have no problems. It comes from their certainty and their awareness that their well-being and life flourishing is at the center of the vision and the policy of Bhutan. So this unit of vision is our North Star in the deep and rapid transformation, and reverence for life is our rudder. Already we are seeing qualities of conversation. We've just completed Roundtable 2, Jude and I, of the science and the economics groups. We're seeing qualities of conversations that are beyond what we hoped for. And the biggest surprise is the role that the new forms of AI are playing in this process as a partner to living beings in the conversation. There's so much more to say, so I'll turn this over to my dear partners, Joni and Jude, who will fill you in on the other facets of this remarkable initiative.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I love hearing how about some of these famous system thinkers that I read about, thinking about them like coming together and collaborating and doing projects together, because they make them more into real people, you know, who are like us, and we're the next ones
Right.
in this lineage. So that's wonderful.
You know, Cara, I was 29 when I was part of that work. That's where I met Dana and started working with her. That's where I met Lynn. That's where I met Bucky. And I'm telling you, their inspiration is alive and well and newly reformed and regenerating with this initiative. It's time. It's now time.
That's wonderful. Good. You were speaking so eloquently about the importance of this unitive narrative. So let's dig into that with Jude next. Say, what does this mean? It's a new word for many people. What does it mean? What does it mean for this work? You know, why is it important to obtain the development goals in this deep and rapid transformation way?
Thank you, Cara. Well, first of all, I want to thank Heidi, because without Heidi, the work that we're doing in the DRTC and the progress we're making in these dimensions of science and technology and innovation and economic architecture would not have got anything like the amazing progress that we're able to co-create together. And Heidi mentioned a little way back, so I'll go a little way back too, because it was about 3 or 4 years ago now, I think 4 years ago now, where a group of us from the evolutionary leaders who had been working with folks at the UN and change makers at the UN, who'd been working there for decades on decades, really came together because there was a clear recognition that the implementation of the SDGs were just not progressing. They were not happening to the extent that they needed to be in the timeframes that they needed to be. And calling together some preliminary convenings as to why this was the case, it became very clear that it was led by or constrained by a perspective of separation. And therefore, the work that was being done, very well meaning a huge amount of effort and progress, yet was coming from essentially a worldview of separation. So what was coming forward were siloed attempts to undertake transformational change. Now, as a healer, amongst many other hats, I know that if we try to treat the symptoms of a dis-ease, we may moderate those symptoms, but we will not actually heal the underlying dis-ease. And so, in a sense, the SDGs came forward as attempts to moderate the symptoms of a collective dis-ease of separation. And of course, because they were seeking just to address the symptoms, they naturally are not able to resolve the underlying dysfunction, and they're not able, therefore, to do what they're meant to be doing. So when this group came together a few years ago, it was very clear that the only way that we could actually serve truly transformational change, which is really what the SDGs are about and beyond, is actually to come forward with a new narrative. And because we're a narrative sharing species, we're story sharing species. And if we see that the stories we might consider as the waves on top of the ocean, as we delve deeper beneath the waves and those stories, we actually actually have a narrative, whether we articulate it or it's often just, well, that's how it is. But nonetheless, that underlying narrative drives our choices, decisions, and behaviors. So realizing this, the group that came together realized that we need a new narrative, and a new narrative that, instead of a prevailing paradigm and narrative of separation and materialism, an underlying narrative that is unitive. Now, it may, if we go back to ancient times, if we speak with the wisdom of indigenous peoples, they have unitive narratives. In other words, a narrative which is fully inclusive of all life and all existence, a unitive narrative which recognizes the interdependent, interrelated, interbeing of the wholeness of reality. But that's not what science has taught us until now. But we're in a time now where leading edge science is converging with those universal wisdom teachings to enable an evidence-based unitive narrative to be articulated that can underpin and frame transformational change in the world. Because if we're seeing through a lens of separation, we'll behave accordingly as we have been, in which case behaviors and situations such as inequities, conflicts, exploitations are natural behaviors from that perspective of separation. When we change the lens through which we see the world and therefore experience the world to one of unity and diversity, then instead of conflicts being natural outcomes, peace is a natural outcome. So this is really the power of a unitive narrative. And this is what a number of us, and in fact, the whole of that SDG Thought Leaders Circle came together, and Joni was part of this as well, came together to articulate a unitive narrative. Now, a unitive narrative is generic, it is universal. It is showing that we can, that, it is actually reflecting now the leading edge discoveries that instead of a universe which is meaningless and purposeless and, where evolution somehow results in us having this conversation, totally turning that on its head, and instead is revealing a living universe that meaningfully exists and purposefully evolves from simplicity to complexity and individuated self-awareness, a universe where therefore we too have innate meaning and evolutionary purpose, and a universe that does so where mind and consciousness are foundational, and where our entire universe exists and evolves in such a unitive state, where everything in existence has meaning and purpose. Everything is part of its great adventure, its evolutionary arc over the last 14 billion years to now and beyond. So when we bring this narrative to underpin and frame an initiative such as the DRTC, it empowers us. It empowers us to be brave, to be courageous, to take leaps into an emergent unknown that we can trust nonetheless. It encourages us to link up and lift up together. It does all of this because it's telling us that we are not separate, that we are literally inseparable from each other, our beloved planetary home Gaia, and the whole world. And so it has applications, of course, in terms of all the SDGs, all of the Agenda 2030 work, the Pact for the Future that the United Nations have come forward with, the Summit of the Future that Heidi mentioned. And beyond that, it's both and. It's both all of that and beyond, because it is truly universal. It can guide us, as Heidi said, it can be our North Star, it can be, its reverence for life can be our rudder on this great journey forward. So that's what a unitive narrative is. We'll put into the chat how folks can find it. And it invites every one of us into this great journey of homecoming, this great adventure of evolutionary, I don't know what we say, revolutionary purpose.
Yeah, that's beautiful. When you share the cosmic hologram and the unitive narrative with me, it sort of changes the way I walk through the world and feel the space. And I think if that narrative is in everything we're saying to each other, then we're it changes us, it rises our vibration about everything being together, and it changes the decisions we start to make and how we start to strategize if everything's separate versus everything if we're all together.
Yeah.
Like to so Joni, some people in our network feel, what about why the UN? Can we trust the UN? Or is there any value in us trying to talk to the UN? Are they listening? Can you just take us, why is this, tell us about the relationship this has with the UN and why it's important for our community?
Sure, I'd love to. And I have some slides I'm going to share because I want to cover some real basics about what the UN is and what it isn't, and to give you a backdrop of what we're talking about. The UN is the only place in the whole world where everybody's agreeing on one agenda. And at the moment, the agenda until 2030 is the Sustainable Development Goals. It's the only table in the entire world where all nations are working together toward global public good. People have a lot of different ideas about what that is, and it's not that easy. It's easy to put in a bullet, but it's a big job. And for example, if you're in an airplane and you want the same safety rules whether you land in China or Iran or the US somewhere, that happens at the UN. And there are all kinds of other things that touch your life that you would have no idea, not to mention all the peacemaking that UN doesn't have a big outward reaching PR department. The work is internal. And right now it's working on its own transformation. It's rethinking the basis of current global order, and especially of global governance and of the financial architecture of the entire world, because it's falling apart. GDPs are smaller than the interest on some debts. And so it's clearly not a plan for survival, even for the most traditional economists anymore. So I do want to address what the UN is not, because I've heard a lot of really, honestly, just bat poop crazy about what the UN is. It is not a conspiracy. There's so much nonsense going on. If the UN was all that coherent that it could be a conspiracy or a cabal against the world, we would already have global peace, because that's what people come there to make happen. That's what they sign on to. All kinds of dysfunction happens. There's no doubt there are issues, but it is not a big cabal, dark conspiracy. It's just not. And anybody who's delivering that, they're not a source of information for you. And I would move on from that disinformation, because that's one of the biggest problems right now. So, but the UN does recognize that it's not delivering on the solutions, and that Agenda 2030 is not in place. And so this is Agenda 2030. It's 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and those goals are pretty much a to-do list for the entire world. And you could probably almost name them without even looking at them. This took 3 years to come to this, and there are all kinds of targets and more practical things underneath all of these. They have their limitations, they have their problems. There's some silo thinking here and all that, but nonetheless, the whole world agreed on this agenda. That's a big deal. Trying to figure out how to advance my slides here. There we go. So we started at the UN the unit of cluster thanks to the work of the SDG TLC group, and to a lot of colleagues around the UN who frankly were just really sick and tired of pussyfooting around the words consciousness and love and compassion. We were using all kinds of cover words because, just like in the culture at large, you were kind of disregarded as inconsequential, fluffy stuff. Well, now the culture at large has come into more transformational thinking, and the UN population is just as representative of that culture as anywhere. And so there were a lot of NGOs around the UN. Now, NGOs are sanctioned by the UN to work there. It's a process of being present there, of proving that you have a reason to be there, that you are there, and then you get a badge. And so the unit of cluster is those badge holders who are working on the ground at the UN. And we came together to say that the cosmological, physiological, biological, environmental, and spiritual truth of unity is a basis of truth that's been disregarded, and that we are going to work there. And we actually set the domain of consciousness as a domain of work, unabashedly, unashamedly, unapologetically. And so just establishing that, I honestly think when we applied to form the cluster, we used the word love and consciousness in our application. I have to think that's the first time ever at the UN, and we got approved. So we've been an entity there for just over a year, and we do a lot of interventions, written interventions in very specific UN processes. We keep our focus in the lane at the UN on very specific processes. And so we do events there, we do side events. We just did one on International Day of Conscience that was outward facing, and I'll be glad to put the link to that when I finish this. We established Gaia as a living, Earth as a living entity as part of our principles, that if we are going to have meaningful economic and social transformation, it's got to be based on love, compassion, and human rights. The Declaration of Human Rights is a very critical and fabulous document. And we're saying put that at the center before all else gets decided about wars and everything else. Because if you make security a human right rather than a nation's right, it completely transforms the conversation of security. Mm-hmm. And also whole systems thinking is really critical. And we are in support of the United Nations being united. That's really what we're in business to do. So before we were convened as a cluster, the 75th anniversary of the UN came about. And as you heard in my introduction, I helped to write the people's response to this. And the Secretary General set up an office for 3 years before 2020 to say that we don't want to look back and say, haven't we been wonderful for 75 years? We want to look forward and say, how do we need to change so the UN is fit for purpose? So that not just the UN, but all the instruments of global governance. And this is where you get this cabal thinking. Political boundaries are not, they're constructs of our mental processes. They have nothing to do with the way that water flows or birds fly or things happen in the world. And so if you want to look at this, if you want to use your credit card in a different country, you need some place where all of this comes together. And so at the 75th anniversary, it was acknowledged that the UN, as it stands after all these years, is no longer fit for purpose for doing what it's in business to do. And that's in the UN Charter, easy to look up. It's a beautiful document, also some work going on and possibly changing that, but it's pretty strong. And if the world really just happened around the Charter of the UN, we'd be in good shape. But out of the 75th anniversary process, there came a report, our common agenda from the Secretary General, very important report because this has to be reported back on every single year. And over 1 million people around the world were brought in at every level into conversations, really almost 2 million people were brought into many conversations to determine what do we need to create the world we want to live in. And these were the 12 agreements and commitments that came out of that. And I highlighted the ones that I thought this community is probably best situated to make a difference in. Leave no one behind is a big UN agenda right now. My thought about that, though, is who are we that there's such a thing as behind? If you went to a lot of indigenous communities and talked about somebody being behind, they wouldn't know what you were talking about. So if we really had a unitive narrative, a unitive infrastructure, there would be no such thing as behind. Promoting peace is really important. Building trust is something we're seeing. I am seeing that come out as the bottom line of so many meetings. I couldn't even recount them all for you today, but it's a major, major point right now. Upgrading the UN, that's the process right now, especially with the upcoming Summit of the Future. That is what it's all about. And ensuring financing, that has evolved to become transforming the global economic architecture. And of course, partnerships need to be transformed and grown. The mandate of the upcoming Summit of the Future on September 22nd and 23rd is transforming global governance and transforming the global economic architecture. And there's also a People's Action Weekend, the weekend before the 20th and 21st, And that's where UN badge holders come together to do the civil society input. And that's why we're planning the Deep and Rapid Transformation Convergence on the 19th. And the overall purposes of the summit, and there's a document called the Pact for the Future that's outlining a lot of what's going to happen in the Summit of the Future. It's to reaffirm the charter. It's to bring multilateralism, which it means, several countries being at the table at the same time, into greater coherence. And so that when the countries talk, better things happen, higher levels of cooperation happen. To get these existing commitments, everybody agreed on the Sustainable Development Goals. The United States has not even reported out. Every year in July, a number of countries do voluntary national reviews, and often 30, 40 countries will give their status. And it's really amazing. There are some countries who have complete governmental offices dedicated to it. So to look at new solutions, to restore trust, to really grow the global family. And for me, for my work, what's most important is what happens in these white spaces between all the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. That's the space of mindset, of consciousness, of assumptions like there should be such a thing as behind. Culture is really determined by narrative, and they're like the water we swim in. We don't even think of them most of the time. And so to get really present about those things and how what underlies, what's behind and in the center of these Sustainable Development Goals are these intangibles, and they need their own space and their own place to be talked about. We need to recognize that it's time for paradigmatic change, and that's some of the data that has come up in the UN work leading up to this by some of the scientists is we can't get there project by project. And, if projects alone were enough, we would already be transformed, because there are amazing projects. Many of you are already involved in them, but there has to be something much, much deeper. The narrative gets us there. It moves us from this belief that unity is some kind of utopian dream we might never get to understanding unity is our existential reality. It's that our policies and practices need to catch up with that reality. So we're talking about a paradigmatic transformation, deep, deep, deep systemic transformation. And part of that transformation came from me after I talked with a colleague, and he said, hey, all this fringy stuff isn't so fringy anymore, is it? And I thought, no, we're not on the fringe of anything. We're at the center of something entirely new and different. And how do we connect that thinking, the thinking that most of us on this call are very comfortable and interested in, and many people are great experts in? How do we link that to this global dialogue that's been in process since 2017 with millions of people already in it? How do we join that conversation and bring our wisdom to bear in that conversation? And so the Deep and Rapid Transformation Convergence is coherent with UN documents like the Charter, like the Declaration on Human Rights. It's coherent with the science that Jude just put out, and it's coherent with all major spiritual traditions. And we have quite a few religious organizations that are part of the unitive cluster. And so it comes down to a unitive consciousness, because consciousness is causal. Consciousness is root causal. Every social problem is, first of all, a crisis of consciousness. And so it is time for big, bold, and bodacious change, and that happens in the domain of consciousness. And so it is paradigmatic. We do have to move beyond fix-it kind of projects. Those are good. I applaud all of you who are doing those kind of projects. And we need much more funding into this harder to fund, harder to work in, bigger conversation that might take several generations before we see the real fruits of our labor. But how do we do that? Even the UN, our Common Agenda report says we need to reset the foundations. And that's what this is about. So the Deep and Rapid Transformation Convergence, it coincides with the Summit of the Future. It coincides with the People's Action Weekend. It's based on a lot of the pillars of the Pact for the Future. So we bring these conversations into coherence with each other so we can bring this unit of consciousness into the global dialogue that's already in process, so that we can articulate new and unitive ways forward. And so that we can start to develop economic valuations that are grounded in what people value most. People don't value electronic dollars and currencies moving to make stocks go up and down. They don't value weaponry. People value love. They value connectivity. They value happiness and well-being. And so a lot of the work right now is how do we put those things as the core determinants, as the core valuations in a new economic system? And so we're convening this deep and rapid transformation convergence for like-spirited colleagues. This is not a public event yet. We will be reaching out. We have lots going on to bring the public into this after September 19th. At the moment, this is highly curated tables of high-level experts around the 7 dimensions that Heidi talked about. So we can get a high-level leadership dialogue in connection with the high-level leadership at the UN to get this coherent, holistic leadership that's going to take us toward a world that's unified in peace and in common good.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you, Joni. Very clear. Yeah, so we're talking about this bodacious change that that needs to happen, and the theme for today is the technology and the ethics. So let's think about that. So how one of the roundtables is around technology, and Jude is the co-lead of that, and Heidi's the facilitator of the Science, Technology, and Innovation Roundtable, as well as the Economic Architecture Roundtable. So let's dig into what's emerging so far from some of those roundtables, and how can technology help us to increase the scale and scope of these interventions so it can be deep and rapid. Heidi, do you want to start, or whoever wants to start there?
Well, yes, and then I do have to jump off, but this is one of my favorite, as I said, surprises about the process is that in the group that on science, technology, and innovation, we have some real leading thought leaders and people that have created new forms of AI that I never knew about and are watching evolve. I'll never forget the first moment that with Phil Clothier, that I watched him query just regular Chat GPT and noticed the quality of what came out of that platform was incredibly more sensitive and directed than it would have been if it had just been me starting, right? He's very skillful at knowing how to interact with these systems. Even more so, we have people that are part of that group that are teaching new forms of AI, large language models, to be able to learn when they're in deep water and how to return people to other sources of information, which the ones now that are generally available are not doing as easily. So we're watching the evolution of learning how to interact with the human and the living part of it at the center, but how to use this amazing technology to begin to advance the conversation, to synthesize, to iterate, to bring back to the people in the roundtables what they said in new synthesized forms, so that there can be an advance of the conversation. I am really literally blown away by what that allows us to do in these dialogues. Jude?
Happy to, Heidi. Yeah, you and me both. And I'm what I'd like to say a healthy skeptic around technology. You know, I can walk into a room and computers fall apart. So, you know, there is that background, but it is remarkable. I mean, what we were very clear on from the beginning is that all that we're doing in DRTC is human-led and heart-centered. And therefore, however we utilize technology, in this case, AI, it is on that basis. And the folks that we have with us that Heidi mentioned absolutely share this view, because everyone invited into all of the DRTC dimensions is essentially coming from a unitive perspective. So that's where the technology is coming from. I mean, we talk about bias in technology and bias in AI, and we're very transparent in saying, yes, this process and the technology that's supporting it, the AI technology that's supporting it, is biased because it's all founded on a unitive perspective, a unitive narrative, unitive approaches. So when we've been putting information and knowledge bases into the system that is being grown and evolved, things like altruism, compassion, community building, all of the UN stuff for sure, but unitive science, all that, a unitive narrative, of course. So all of this is founded in the technology that we're able then to interact with and find different answers to our questions because of that difference in the perspective. So, for example, if we were to ask a question of ChatGPT stretches across the whole of the internet, takes all the information there is. So, for example, if we were to ask ChatGPT a question such as, will you draw up for me a strategic business model for plastic packaging? ChatGPT would likely answer, of course. And here it is. And this is how you greenwash it. This is how you sell it, as it were. If we were to ask the same question of our CrowdSmart and Kieran AI, the answer would probably be, why do you want to do that? There are so many better ways and sustainable options and this, that, and the other. So all of the regenerative economics has been put into those databases as well. And what we're also absolutely realizing is, I think Heidi or Joni spoke of human rights. I think Joni did. I'm very keen on balancing human rights with human responsibilities. And one of the key insights coming out from what we call them our wizards, our amazing AI technologists, is that don't give our responsibility away. So even with, for example, some of us might use Fathom as a note taker in our online calls, or Otter or whatever. Never see it more as an intern that is learning, a student, a youngster that's learning. Never negate our responsibility to ensure what goes out from that. Check it, be sure we're happy with it, because we found even with these tools, these Fathom Otter tools, there are errors in them that changes the meaning of what's being said. So we're just learning at a deeper and deeper level how technology can help us. But really, technology comes out of a worldview. And the technologies that have been leading the way for the last 100 and more years, since the end of the 19th century to now, are actually based on a mechanistic worldview of materialism separation, that it was its heyday when the Industrial Revolution was coming forward. So despite the discoveries of science, of quantum physics, relativity, all the way to now, when there are massively revolutionary new discoveries that are revealing what I spoke of earlier in terms of an emergent cosmology. Nonetheless, the technologies that we have are based on that old, unsustainable, and essentially incorrect paradigm. So what we're looking for, and as part of the DRTC process, underpinned and framed by a unitive perspective, a unitive worldview, a unitive narrative, is technology that actually aligns with healthy living systems. And by that, we don't just mean biological systems, as Joni said, and the unitive cluster refers to, is Gaia as a sentient planetary home to us. So what are Gaian systems of planetary health, and how can we align with them, both in terms of the emergence of ways forward, of approaches, of co-creating, and a future founded on this understanding, and what then are the healthy technologies that can be our co-pilots, as it were, but not pilots in our own conscious evolution going forward. And I noticed that a couple of folks have quite rightly put in the chat that, different experiences of the UN, absolutely. And that's why the DRTC process, which goes beyond September and continues to build almost as a unitive movement, is far more about aligning with the UN's transformational potential, but it's much wider than that. So it's very much both and, where civil society, grassroots movements are the imaginal cells of what I'm writing about, perhaps reframing our current meta crisis into a metamorphosis. So what we're doing and what many of you on this call are doing and what folks around the world and World Unity Week and the Unity Earth community and many, many more now are linking up and lifting up together from this grounding, this empowering understanding, as Joni said, that unity is not an aspiration, it's our existential reality, but are doing so as the imaginal cells of our conscious evolution, our metamorphosis into what we can evolve to be. And that perhaps can birth and usher in a unitive age. And that's why we're all here. And somebody asked, what's funding? Who's funding the DRTC? Nobody. We came together as a group of volunteers, as change makers, pro bono, to serve this purpose that's greater than the sum of all of us. We're managing to get enough funding to fund the in-person gathering in New York, and hopefully from that we may indeed find funding, but it will be funding from an altruistic perspective. It will be funding that serves the compassion, the love-based being into doing of what we're here to serve together.
Mhm. Yeah, Kara, can I just jump in on a few things there? Funding, I used to work in philanthropy and kept a file called Enlightened Philanthropist, and it never grew. It was a very skinny file. And
Oh, no.
even really forward-thinking philanthropists are still funding fix-it projects. Very few are funding real transformation. And so funding is a dire need. And we would love to talk with you. If you'd love to give any kind of contribution to this, please message me in the box and we will get back to you, because it's really, really critical. So I just wanted to go back a little bit to just reframe the unitive narrative, because I've been in a lot of circles over many years where people said, we need a new story, we need a new narrative, and what came out of those circles was more, better, and different stories about the same old stuff. And so the unitive cluster I was on a lot of Zoom calls with a lot of different people in UN, in World Unity Week, and other places. And I would think, oh, that person's at the UN and they think this way. That person's at the UN, they think this way. And I reached out to Kurt Johnson and I said, we need some kind of way for people to come together who are thinking this way at the UN. And he said, well, that's just where the Thought Leader Circle is coming to. Why don't you join us? And so I came to the first meeting, and one of the first things that happened was we all went in breakout rooms, and I ended up with Jude, and we were talking about the unitive narrative. And I went, yes, now we have a real, honest to goodness, new basis. It's a game changer, folks. I mean, I really encourage you to take a look at it, because it's not just a new story. It's a new fundamental at a really deep systemic change level. And, consciousness comes first. And we've got to get this into the consciousness. I mean, we can't turn it into a Bible. It's not another book in that sense. And there's a certain point where you get critical mass, where enough people are working up this consciousness. They don't necessarily need to read the book. It's just ubiquitous. It's like, I think of it like health food used to be. For those of us who are the dyed-in-the-wool people that were scrounging the organic food we could find anywhere, decades ago, never imagined you could get it in the supermarket at some point. Right. And, we were doing our own research. Now you don't even have to research it. It's in the culture. You just kind of know it's what's so is a better thing. And that's where the unitive narrative is headed, because it's just true. It's coherent with science. It's coherent with all the major religions. And it forms a basis where we really can recognize ourselves as one global family. And so I really encourage you to take a good look at it and to embrace it. See, how does this translate in my world? How does it translate to really making a difference? And I'm seeing a lot in the chat about issues with the UN, and it's true. There's a lot of issues there, and it's working on itself through this Summit of the Future. It's working to try to transcend the special interest, to try to organize the Security Council and some of the places where the imbalances of power play out. These are highly technical things, and that's why we limit these dialogues, because we want to get people who are up to speed with what the technical issues are and how the mechanisms are that can actually lead to change. because just to put good ideas out there is ineffective. And they
I
can be
agree.
great ideas and meaningful, but they're ineffective in the UN process because people aren't up to speed enough to know how to be truly in the dialogue.
Cara, may I jump in? Thanks, Joni, for that. I think something really important to say about our process as well. It is an emergent process, because what we're realizing is we're all in a moment of potential transformation for us as a species. And I think that is why we're having these conversations now, why a unitive narrative can be articulated now, why we're coming together and linking up and lifting up in all that we're doing together from this perspective. And that realizes that our entire universe meaningfully exists to purposefully evolve. And that evolutionary process from simplicity to ever greater complexity has taken nearly 14 billion years to this point. And sometimes that arc, that wave of evolutionary potential has taken millions or hundreds of millions of years. Through Gaia's long story, it's taken potentially sometimes millions of years. And then something happens incredibly quickly. And there's rapid and radical evolutionary progress. And my sense is that those are the times that we're in now. We're in a birthing canal. That's why I describe this as more of a metamorphosis. So what I would suggest is we understand this within the DRTC. So our aim has been to facilitate an emergent process. So we've been both co-creatively building a field of collective coherence, and that is so important, coherence, which is underpinned and framed by unitive perspective and narrative and approach to deep and rapid transformation. And it's a both and, because it enables and empowers naturally emergent attractors of efforts, these attractor basins of synergies and insights and transformational change rather than just iterative change. So, we're really valuing both the being and the doing of our collective focus, not seeking to impose specific deliverables other than those that naturally emerge through this process. So Joni mentioned trust. We move at the speed of trust, we move at the speed of coherence. And when we come together with that intention, then we can move very, very quickly. And that's what we're seeing. And that's why the progress, we're seeing in such a few months and leading onwards is so empowering and exciting for us, because we see how this can be, I won't going to say a role model, but this could be a soul model. We're beta testing some of this stuff. We could be a soul model to beta test some of this stuff that we're all doing. So I'd just like to add a few other themes or memes that are really coming out of this, because Cara, I'm sure you'll recognize some of this in all the work that you've been doing with World Unity Week and beyond. Having joy as guiding our path forward, and with expansive readiness and grace. I knew you'd enjoy that. Urgency to emergence, not that feeling of urgency which tightens us up, but that sense of emergence that opens us up to possibilities. To recognize that, yes, something is coming, but from the inside out. This is illuminating something bigger than any and all of us. And it is the evolutionary impulse flowing through us. So to attune and align with it rather than try and impose or grab onto it. And finally, to appreciate that this can be how we awaken our sacred mission as humanity, and how we can come together to serve and birth the coming of a unitive age.
Yeah, I'd love to build on that. The emergent, I think of things in terms of yin and yang. And so, the yin is emergent and where we're working with these bigger concepts. The yang is, so what's going to happen on the ground? How do we do this? What do we make happen? And that's really where the deep and rapid transformation for convergence serves, is it makes space for the emergent. It makes space for working in the domain of consciousness. And at the same time, it's connecting to those very real pillars of the global dialogue that's already in progress that is linked to very specific deliverables on the Sustainable Development Goals, which are still not, at par to really get the world we want, but at least it's a connection of that yin and yang, which is really where the sparks come in life. When you get the positive and negative charges in the wall come together, you get electricity. And so that's really what we're working on. And I'm just mindful of a story. I was on a UN call where they were debriefing civil society on aid in the world. And so some of the largest aid agencies in the world were reporting out. And one of them said, our mission is to lift people up and then lift up the ground beneath them. And I thought that's really nice, except the ground beneath that is quicksand. Because what's really fundamentally the underlying infrastructure is so based on the separation-based narrative. It's so based on things we consider normal and regular, and just because of the narrative we've all been acculturated with. And even having helped write it and focus on it for much of my week every week, I'm still really acculturated in the separation-based paradigm. And so think of friends who haven't even thought about this. And so we're all kind of there, and it's a work in progress, but we're working at that level beneath even the ground we stand on. We're working at what's beneath that. What's this deeper, deeper, deeper place? Because that's where, when that conversation came up about aid, we lift people up, we lift the ground, but then, what's really holding that ground in place? That's where we're working. Jude, you're muted.
Thanks, Cara. And that, Joni, really brings us back to the economic architecture dimension of our DRTC process, because it's very much, how do we move from a current economic framework, which is based on these old the old paradigm of separation with all its hierarchies and everything that we know has flowed through that. How do we transition through to an economic architecture that aligns with, that actually embodies this unitive perspective? And that's already ongoing. And I think one of the things we're bringing through the DRTC is a perspective on that we can progressively then share, in wider sense. But one of the things that really is important, and it goes on from a narrative to stories, because what's been realized, there's a lot already happening. There's a huge amount already happening, but often our mainstream media does not pick up on it. It picks up on the if it bleeds, it leads mentality of an old worldview of separation. Whereas what we're seeing, and I'm sure virtually everybody, or I hope everybody joining us today is seeing, is there are stories of seeds of hope, of seeds of incredible genius. I mean, Juliet put in the chat about how civil society's engagement, just when we link up and lift up together, we can share wisdom, we can share and support each other. In that mutuality is greater than the sum of the parts. So one of the things we're realizing through the whole process, and especially with regard to the economics of it, is finding ways to share stories. Heidi mentioned Bhutan. There's great things happening in other countries and in other areas, in other bioregions, and other smaller points. But let's share this, because whether people are coming from a specifically perceived unitive perspective, or just that knowingness of indigenous communities, of the web of life that conjoins us all. Nonetheless, the more stories we can share, the more we can bring into the sort of lived experience and embodiment that a unitive narrative speaks to.
Yes, thank you. I want to move us into a little bit more on the ethics, because when we see the deep and rapid transformation that's already happening in this world, we're seeing AI and robots changing the nature of wealth and work, and even intimacy. I've heard this wonderful parable quote that said, Facebook monetized our attention and AI is monetizing our intimacy, because it can really talk to you and create a relationship with you. through this. And I'm so interested in AI and all the robots, and when I look online, it's Boston Dynamics, it's Google, it's Facebook, it's fake images, fake movies. It's the way that all this it's more of the stock market is held by the top three companies. So it's more inequality. So that's rapid change that's actually happening. And so Janice Hall was putting up in the chat there, in order to reset the very foundations of how money and fairness and work and joy works, we have to deal with these entrenched special interests, like billions of dollars of investment are going into these companies that don't have this unitive mindset. It's weapons companies, it's advertising companies. And I'm not seeing like, oh, where are all the robots that are doing the recycling and creating closed loop systems? Why haven't I heard about these? Why am I seeing these like little dogs that jump that can take bombs that can mine areas? And like, wow. So I'm just wondering what kind of technologies that you're seeing emerging that are in the innovative space, and what are some of the the ways that are emerging through those conversations to deal with these deeper ethical and power issues.
Well, first of all, as I was saying, thanks, Cara. I mean, this is so fundamental to how we, serve truly transformational change. If you remember, Heidi talked about working with Donna Meadows all those years ago. And what Donna Meadows did is she actually looked at what changes things. What is a theory of change? How can things change? And yes, you can change goals. Yes, you can change this and that and the other. But the very top level of change comes from changing someone's worldview. And that's really what we're talking about. We're talking about healing a worldview of separation, for which all those technologies you refer to emerge from, to a worldview, as Joni said, of the existential nature of reality itself, which is unitive. Now, I can't promise, none of us can promise whether we can actually undertake the level of deep and rapid transformation that's not just about this initiative, but for us as a global family, as a species of humanity, able to do that in time, because we're heading towards a cliff at the moment. We're almost at the cliff. We're probably even over the cliff because of our unsustainable behaviors coming from that worldview of separation. And many of the folks and the organizations you refer to, Cara, are coming from that perspective. But just as Joni said, there are seeds of change everywhere. From, the sort of the farmers in the Amazon or India or Australia, through to the tops of organizations, to the tops of governance. And we're working, for example, within the dimension on economic architecture with CEOs who are very much coming from a unitive perspective. What they are looking for is to know they're not alone. So this linking up and lifting up that we're doing, whether it's through the DRTC, whether it's through World Unity Week, whether it's through whatever it is, whether it's through the Global Oneness Summit later in the year, whether it's through the 99 Days of Change, whether it's through World Peace Week, more and more and more, we are having the opportunity to share stories, to hear from each other and learn from each other and link up and lift up together and level up and light up together. So, I absolutely appreciate where you're at, but I was, as Heidi was, and I know Joni is, and Heidi and I are probably closer in the Joni at the moment, on these incredible wizards we have on the AI front, who are coming from a human-led, heart-centered perspective of AI that can actually take us forward. So the technologies will come out of the worldview, and there are a lot of new technologies coming out that aren't as you described, but they are wanting to be in service. And when you talk about the ethics of all of this, I was speaking at a big literary festival a week ago at the British Library in London, and I was talking about exactly this with leading business people and an audience that was absolutely open to what this means. So I think the time is now. This is, as Heidi said, this is an idea whose time has come, but I think more it's the time whose idea has come. And it's not despite, it's because when we look at evolutionary progress, and especially incredibly rapid and radical evolutionary progress, it's at times such as these when the old will not hold.
Yes, I think that's a big part of it. And when you look at how one tiny little microscopic virus changed the entire world deeply and rapidly, you have to think there may be other options for miracles out there, that are more positive in shaping what we want to be. I wanted to respond to all the things in the chat. First, well, another thing about AI is, from what I understand, and I have no expertise in this, but what I'm hearing from our colleagues is that we have about 2 years before AI is almost sentient, almost equal to us in terms of what it can generate. And so what we put into it in the next 2 years is really, really, really critical, because it only exists of what we put in it. It's not its own thing until about 2 years from now. And so when it becomes its own thing, what kind of DNA do we want in there? And that's one of the reasons we feel like what comes out of this deep and rapid transformation convergence into AI mechanisms is critical, because there is so much already in there from the business as usual machine, from the domination machine, that it's already chock full of that. So get your new stuff into AI in every single way you can think of. Now is the time to pack it. My own sense of AI, when I first got into the conversation and realized how much was happening, is that almost immediately we're going to have a global income, a global basic income, because it's going to disrupt so many jobs so quickly that an economy is not going to be able to stand unless it puts some money in some people's hands. And that could be the breakthrough right there. There's also really deep and important work at every level, from CEOs to the UN to the World Bank to even traditional institutes, that are getting the feedback from the world that we're sick and tired of corporations running the show, that people have a lot more to say and do in this. And so there is movement all the way around in empowering people. That's a lot of what the UN process is about right now, is reinventing the global economic architecture so that it no longer pays to bomb people off the earth. So it no longer pays. I mean, I just saw, I forget which country had a major fire in an ammunition factory and people died. And my first thought was, but how many people got saved? We're not reporting on that, because how many people would have been killed with that ammunition? So it's a tragedy no matter how many people died, whether it was in the fire or the outcome of those munitions staying safe. I mean, what's safe about a storehouse of munitions to begin with? So those are the kinds of questions that people are asking at very high levels. Yes, there is entrenched corporate interest. Yes, we are coming out of a paradigm that has got us by the ankles and is choking literally the air out of us, and that is absolutely not a plan for survival. Enough people recognize that. We're keeping the conversation going. Thank heavens for platforms like World Unity Week, where we can bring this conversation out into the larger public, to give people language, to give people trust and hope and understanding that you're not alone when you're thinking this way. This thinking is getting more and more and more developed. Those of us who have been at this a long time are a little gun shy, because we've all been harmed by the pushback at tables that are more traditional in their thinking and not wanting some of this to break through. Folks, those days are done. I mean, you're still going to find tables where that happens, but there's plenty more where it doesn't happen. Just move to the different table. I am no longer pushing against fixing the old paradigm. I'm not pushing against being labeled woo-woo or airy-fairy, all the other degradations that come out of the fear of this love-based, unitive-based motion coming forward. Put yourself there. Put yourself in the transformation that is so. We are united. That's just what's so. And so come from there. And it's no longer time fighting against the corporations and the entrenchment and all that. It's just like, it's a Buddhist concept. Whatever you're attached to, whatever you're pushing away, you're attached to. As long as I'm pushing my cup away, the whole universe is my cup. The entire universe exists outside of my cup. And yet I'm focused on pushing my cup. That's the same thing you get when you're pushing against all these dysfunctional things. I personally don't do it anymore. I don't spend my time there. There's still reason to. I applaud those of you who want to, but be careful, because so many times you're allowing an old paradigm to set the narrative, and then you're responding into that narrative. You may be saying negative things about it, but you're still actually in that domain. You're not in the domain of really making change. As long as you're in the domain of fighting against something, it's determining the parameters of the conversation. We've just laid out through this, and through all of World Unity Week, through all the work that many people contributing to this week are doing, there is plenty out there that gives you ground to stand on in terms of standing in the being of, it's time. We're here. There's a critical mass everywhere, inside corporations, inside the UN, everywhere. We've been quiet because sometimes we've been the one voice, but we didn't know that the person across the table was also one voice. They were also afraid to speak up. But now we know that. Now we know that there's way more at the table than would normally be. When I bring up the words consciousness at the UN, which I've been careful over years, and now I'm not so careful anymore, and I really push the envelope about this. And what I see more often than not is relief. It used to be, if you mentioned these kinds of things on the wrong elevator, if you were a UN employee, you could lose your career track. That's just not true anymore. There's an Office of Transformation at the UN. They don't always mean what we might mean in terms of transformation. They sometimes mean big change, which, again, is not enough. It has to go much deeper. We have to stand for real paradigmatic transformation. Really, transmutation is really more accurate of what we need. It's a metaphysical job. And so that's part of it, is dignifying the work of metaphysicians and dignifying that domain of work. That's part of what makes the new paradigm new, is that that's no longer considered out there, airy-fairy. I don't enter those conversations anymore. You don't have to convince. We have enough. The coalition of the willing is already big enough. We just have to cohere, and we have to have the courage and the conviction to stand behind this new paradigmatic principles.
Good. I think let's do some metaphysical journeying work on this. So I'd like to take us on a bit of a spiritual journey and let the evolutionary impulse flow through us here now, and give us we can get some insights for how this deep and rapid transformation can happen, but also sort of energy and helping make it happen as well through our conscious collective intention. So let's start. I'll ring my bell, and we'll just use that as the bell rings. Just help that to bring yourself fully grounded, whatever that means to you, in your way, relaxing your body, arriving deep on your chair and in your feet, noticing that we're all on the earth and that it's one earth, so we are all connected in this time, and even in the time continuing in the recording. Maybe be fully grounded. And let us call in this field. We're calling in the field of humanity by around 2030. In the field of the UN and international relations and these forces of technology, and this unitive narrative and its ability to transmute the way technology is used. We call in the consciousness of Gaia and the higher selves of the decision makers and power brokers of this work, and the conscious selves of the communities who it affects. If Jude or Joni would like to call in one more element that's open now to be co-creating the space?
I would call in and welcome and invite all the multidimensional beings, the discarnate beings, the wise beings who support us, who are with us as companions and guides on this evolutionary journey together. We are not alone. This physical realm is not the only realm. It emerges from deeper realms of universal wisdom and intelligence, and that wisdom and intelligence is embodied in so many incredible sources of guidance for us at this time. I welcome, invite, and I'm grateful for them.
Yes.
I call in all of our dreams, all of our desires, all of our heart and soul longings for a world that works for everyone. I call in that heart space that wants to live in peace, that can see and dream and believe in a world in harmony, a world where all beings go to sleep safe, fed, and warm, where we have joy, where we have health, well-being, happiness at the core of all of our policies, our laws, our practices, where we move into the highest of humanity being our decision-making mechanism.
Mm.
I call in your vision and your steadfastness in that vision, in that heart calling. I call forward your strength, your rootedness in the knowing that as we come together here in this group, as this message travels out through all of our doing and thinking and being in the world, that that is indeed enough. That's enough to get the world we want. Things can flip very quickly. I call forward the consciousness it takes to create the field of that being that the world can just roll into with joy and ease. Simply.
Aho.
Now we sit in this intention. Joni's named much of it. This intention of this little journey now is to feel the process happening, to get some guidance of how we can support this deep and rapid transformation to come about and to be. We can get energetic feelings, visions of how it might happen. And one intention is to see 3 big movements that sort of make it happen, or to see some kind of breakthrough. That's as part of the intention of what we'll access coming up. And also part of the intention is what Joni named this sense of ease and joy that permeates, that makes it possible. Yeah, that's our intention. So now I'd like to invite everyone into a space of accessing, the quiet space within yourself to feel the energy flow in, the visions, the body sensations. What is that? What's evolutionary impulse showing you about this breakthrough? What made it really work for everyone? The oil companies, the technologies, the governments, the people, the workers, the UN, the activists, the planet, the animals. And is there a ritual for us to do here? Yes. And someone to do the first step. Is it Jude? So Jude, I'd like us to do, I think we'll do a ritual. It has perhaps 3 steps to it, and we're going to co-create it in the moment. And you're to access what's the first step in this ritual to sort of seal this intention. And just unmute yourself.
Thank you, Cara. I think I've already shared it in the chat. Let us all choose love. In every moment, in every way, whatever the challenges may be, let us choose love.
Good. So let's actually do that for a moment, maybe with a sort of emotion. Let us choose love and lean into that and extend it and extend it and extend it and extend it. Joni, what's the second step in this ritual?
Native Americans had sign language that they used to trade with each other, and they actually had a sign for the word wisdom, which already says a lot that they needed that in the trade community and indigenous people. But the sign for wisdom was to touch the head, touch the heart, and to bring both hands together. And I think that's really what's now, we've been so head-centered, the yang. We're saying to be more heart-centered, which is true, and we probably need to err in that direction. We probably need to, when in doubt, yin out is probably the answer at this particular era. But it's the bringing of them together, and at the end, that's what the deep transformation is about. It's about bringing that yang dominant UN process that's very heady together with our hearts and our souls. So if you want to do that with me, touch your head, touch your heart, and bring your hands together. May we be wise.
And the final piece of this ritual is now, or if you can soon, find some water and just bless the water and put that, all this intention into it and send that around the world, because water travels around the world quite regularly. Is that complete?
Charles, that's for you.
Yay.
Kurt, I'm sorry, Kurt, that's for you.
Good. So I'd just like to open space for some emergent sharing, and then in a few minutes we can call on people to also share what did they feel in the accessing part, and what are their questions for Joni and Jude.
Lesson because you ladies just knocked it out of the ballpark, because what more is there than love?
Please raise your digital hand, and then we can find you and put you up so everyone can see your loveliness. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
You ladies just knocked it out of the ballpark, as the old coaches used to say. And you knocked it out with incredible love. My God, what else can we do? And that's why this little symbol that Joni knows, because I shared a little bit, the zooming peace. It's this peace salute. And we see the world as you just described it. It's all love. Some people just don't see that, and yet it's everywhere. And so we throw that love out to the world, and what does it create? It creates peace. What a force. And that's what we are. And we get to spread it. And I put in the chat about getting others aboard, especially our youth, because they so dearly want to feel that love. They just don't know how because there's all these technologies to distract them. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
And Kurt, I'd just like to add something, if I might. You mentioned, of course, youth are fundamental. And to assure you that through our DRTC process, we are fully not just welcoming, inviting, but absolutely vitally grateful for all the voices and presence of youth. We're holding meetings together with young people from the ages of 14 to 18 and the ages of 18 to 30, and really asking them what they want. We're not trying to impose what we feel is right for them. We're saying, what do you need? What do you want? How can we serve you? And that's very integral to the whole process of the DRTC and going forward.
I'm going to put in the chat just something about the youth. There's a man that I met on the 10th anniversary of the Walk Across America for climate change. And he has a green actioneers process that gets kids, elementary school kids, to get excited about doing simple things in the home that they can do to help ameliorate the problem with climate. Because 70% of the climate issue is generated in each of the homes. And I hope we spread this around and around and get the youth started at that age, and the world will change much more rapidly than
Beautiful, Kurt. Thank you. We're ready for
Thank you.
Carmen.
Okay, thank you so much, ladies. This has been amazing. I want to ask, what does, I want to ask two questions, one of Jody and one of Jody. Jude and Jody. Jude, what is the DRTC process? What is that? In very
I think,
briefly.
Carmen, you might like to watch the recording, because right at the beginning of today's session, Heidi set that out for us. So look
Okay.
at the recording. Yeah. So perhaps
Very
not to
good.
use our time now, but look at the recording. We laid it all out there at the beginning.
Beautiful, beautiful. That's great. I will do that. And to Joni, is there a space, a group, an organization that I can go to engage in the conversation of conscious philanthropy?
Oh boy, I wish I knew. I really wish I knew. I would suggest you start one. I know that there is more going on. Oh, what's the name of it? There are some younger family office people who have come together. Someone on the call may know the name of the group. It's a pretty closed group, so I don't know what kind of access you can get to it.
That the
But
resources, I think it's called could be resources. I think it's called.
that's not the one I'm thinking of, but that may be. It is so critical because there is so little happening. Like I said before, even people who are deeply, deeply about high-level transformation, they're still funding, like, doing, making water wells, which is important funding, but it's not going to get us to the change we need.
Okay, well, lots of work to do on the philanthropical side.
You have,
Yes,
Carmen,
I'd be happy
over
to
to
talk with
you.
you further about that. I would love to continue that conversation, Carmen.
Yes.
Okay.
Gaia Commons and I and Dan Spinner, we're creating a fund called Love Organized, and that's part of the point, is that we want to create a fund for this deeper transformational conscious work. So.
And I'm with
Brilliant.
Adriana. Some of you may know Adriana Alvarez from La Ventana, who was
Yes.
involved in Mexico in Palenque. She and I and another woman who founded a foundation in Los Angeles. We're all three Latina women, two Mexicans, and I'm from Puerto Rico. We're creating the Earth Angels Philanthropy Network.
Okay.
And it will be based on unitive thinking, unitive worldview.
Terrific, Carmen.
Great.
Anything
Can
we
you
can
put
do
your
to
email?
help with that, let us know.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, put your email in the chat, and because I want to connect with Adriana as well in that. So we have up next Hasina Patel from the Hague Center.
Thank you, Kara. I just want to put something into this beautiful sacred space. You know, a lot of us think that we are, we recognize, you know, what we can do and how we can shift things, and we're into consciousness and we know the power of love, and that there are people who don't in this world, and considering that there's no real polarity when we shift ourselves and we shift our collective, what we put into the greater interconnectedness is a collective shift of the whole world, and we contribute to that. And it is not even necessary that every single person in the world believes in this or knows this, but we can shift and they will become part of the momentum because we're all interconnected. There's no separateness. And we get to see that. And I think that gives such hope because, yes, we know this. In South Africa, here in South Africa, we've seen this, especially in 1994, where we just shifted the entire collective with that belief in oneness that we could come together in unity. And I just want to put into the space that we just hold that it doesn't have to be all to shift all of us.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the point with universal consciousness, Hasina. When we do come together, when we link up and lift up together in that understanding and frequency of love, then the ripples spread beyond whatever we might even consider. And, you know, one of the things that I'm grateful for is I don't have to worry about the outcome. All I need to do is show up and get out of the way.
Such a relief.
It so is. It so is. So keep showing up as we're all doing, you're all doing.
And
Get
go
out
with
of
the
the way.
flow. The flow is happening.
Joni, you know, I say glow with the flow. I think we're going up a level. We're glowing with the flow.
Yes.
All right, let's see Andrew's glow come up here. He has a question for us.
I actually don't have a question. I just love everything you're saying. We're all one. That's it. I have a poem I like to share, a oneness poem. Is that okay? It goes with everything that we've been doing.
Yeah, if it's like less than 2 minutes, that's fine.
Yeah, it takes about 2 minutes.
Yeah, great.
It's called The World is in Our Hands. I see the whole world in my hands, dancing in the streets. As I sit on the rock of our soul is solid, full, whole. The sands, the lands, ocean, and stars are within us. Take a bus inside your heart and see that the whole wide world is in your hands. Bathe in beauty. The eye is in the beholder. There is nothing that you are not. The universe is all in you, too. There is nothing that you are not. You are everything. And when you join hands with another and another and another and another, the ripple effect begins, igniting the energy of love that is in us all. The light, the way, the truth will set us free to be you and me, free to be you and me in the yellow submarine of our ever-glowing hearts. The seed of our soul, take the bowl and lick every corner, for you are feeding your mind, body, soul with the true nurturing that you long for. Love, love, all there is love. The other way does not flow with you, so bow down to your feet and pray for forgiveness. If you choose to find a way to reach the divine's higher calling, I see the whole world in my hands, dancing in the streets. Let us all reach for the stars by placing our feet rooted in the grounds. Rise up your hands in prayer for Mother Earth and know you are one with her. It is time to wake up. Many are now. Things are moving fast now. Soon we will see the other side of our actions, grace, and connection. Connect with the one inside your heart is all that is, and see that the whole wide world is in your hands. It is time to rhyme with the horses, dolphins, and birds, trees, plants, minerals, and plant ourselves with the land. Nurture the soul, nurture the land. Love ourselves, love the earth. Find peace inside and find peace on earth. We are one with everything, and it is knowing as much back as indigenous first peoples, the first to try to alert us, let us go back to their ways, for the whole wide world is in our hands, and we need to give our TLC, tender loving care, the way we would treat babies or family or close friends. We are one family. Let us all treat each other with kind acceptance. We are
Good. Just say that last sentence again.
what?
Just repeat
Oh,
the last sentence.
sorry. Let us all treat each other with kindness, acceptance, and care. We are one family. Remember, welcome home.
Thank
Beautiful.
you.
I've got down about this unity consciousness, the new coming era. 28 years ago, I got the calling, and I'm glad we're all on this path together. Thank you.
Bless.
Thank you. Thank you so much, my dear.
Good. So Joan Hub would like to shine on us next. Joan from
Thank,
Sun Hub from Ottawa.
thank you, Cara. Thank you. Thank you, Jude. See you again. Thanks
It's
a
good to
lot.
see you.
Yeah, I totally agree that change starts from the top, that worldview, and we got to go from inside out. And yeah, there's no outcome can be like measured at this moment because it's hard to measure, but you can feel it.
Yes.
And definitely, Joni, and I love whatever your work there is doing at this, the environment you are in. That is very courageous. Thank you very much for this work. And I'm just wondering, as Sanhab Inc., it is a think and act tank. So we were also thinking about that, we needed to shift to the new paradigm and starting from an economic system that it's coming from conscious businesses. So we'd like to, prove this concept. So in Canada, if it is possible, and how can we, demonstrate what you are doing with the unitive narrative that guide us and the worldview, guide us, and this type of consciousness and love, and how can we build this community, through that economy that really value what's important in life. Thank you.
Thank you, Joan. I think you're already doing it and you're sharing in it. And, as we're saying, the more we are aware of what each other is doing, the more we can come together and link up and lift up, underpinned, empowered, inspired, guided by unitive narrative and perspective. We find our ways to each other as we're doing now. So thank you for all you do.
Yes, I can see we are apart, we are together. We are
Yes.
doing it together.
Yes.
So now because we wanted to scale up this concept. So how can we scale up into the mainstream? And we want to show mainstream what we're doing. So that is the purpose. Yeah. Thank you.
Yep. Absolutely. Thank you, Joan.
Thank you, Julie.
Yes. And yesterday, Joan discovered a friend in Ottawa, like by being on this world conference. She two Ottawa people connected, like, oh, I'm going to call you later and then we'll work together.
Excellent.
So, there you go.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Cara. This is lovely.
Good. So I think next we have Janice Hall. She doesn't have her video to share, but she wanted to read something about her intention for us.
Yeah, my camera's not working. I'm here at Joni's house, and for some reason it's not working. I just want to thank you for the most enjoyable, stimulating, visionary session for me so far. And there's been so many of them because this conversation is the one that I live and breathe every day. And I just want to echo my sentiments that I think are just relevant to everything everyone else said, but I just want to put them in the field verbally. And as I said in the chat, because of the intentional polarization. And I want to add the mandate to raise up the intergenerational dialogue because youth are feeling dissociated. And as a marketing person, I see three different categories. Those that are, feeling suicidal because they don't connect to anything. Those that escape into the virtual reality because they don't fit. And then there are the activists, and we must find them all and find a place for them all because I feel we must find a way to magnetize these people. And first, by holding them in our hearts and to be sort of their tour guides through this crazy time right now, because not everybody sees the way that we see. They know there's something else, but they need us to either hold their hands or take our lightsaber and clear the path ahead for them and assist them in discovering their authentic selves because the trainings in school and the way we're brought up teaches us to be a soldier of the them and the they and that past old paradigm. And so in helping them to discover their authentic selves and to know that each and every one is a part of this interdependent web of life and that includes all beings, human and non-human, and that each of them has a place in the ecosystem of the new earth. And that finding their authentic selves is exactly how to find that place because there isn't one too small, from the ant to the grand condor or the elephant, right? And yes, Jude, quantum entanglement has us moving toward each other, and that is what is on our side. And thank goodness science is finally catching up a bit. So with this, I have my hands in prayer and I bow down to the cumulative and collective wisdom. It's collective and it's cumulative. It's growing as we breathe it into the field. Thank you all for being you and being the courageous souls you are to be out there in the world, bridging worlds and bridging dialogues. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Janice. Cara, I love what Janice has just said. And there was one thing that you said, Janice, that I think is so vital. You talked about every being has its role. Every being has its meaningful, existence. And, we talk about unity and we talk about unity and diversity, but I'd love us to go beyond unity and diversity, to go even beyond unity and inclusion, and to go to unity in belonging. Because when every child, when every person of whatever age understands that they truly belong, they don't have to be invited in, they truly belong, that they have innate meaning and purpose. Each of us is unique. And to realize that we do belong to this extraordinary, wondrous universe that is inviting us, I feel at this moment. It's inviting us. Our universe is holding out the hand of evolutionary potential to us to align and serve its evolutionary impulse. My goodness me, what an adventure lies ahead if we say yes to love and yes to that invitation.
Yeah. Yeah, such beauty. So let's move to wrapping up. So everyone has time for a bio break before our next sessions in ethics and innovation co-creation circle coming up next, which would be followed by the Beyond Being Human, our multidimensional relationships pre-recorded session at 4:30 EDT, and then the plenary coming up at 6 is Meeting the Dreaming at 6 p.m. EDT. And it goes on In Search of the Future after that at 7:30 EDT. So lots more amazing interaction and plenaries to come. So how would you guys like to close? What do sort of next steps, what's evolving for the project, or just any final words that you'd like to say?
I appreciate, Cara, that Tom had his hand up, so I don't know if we have time for a very brief from Tom. Otherwise, happy to talk about what's emerging. Okay. Well, the whole point of an emergent process, it's emergent. So although we're very clear on our next steps, they are a continuation, and they're continuing to co-creatively build on what we've done before. So my sense is that when we come as a DRTC, as Heidi said, to September, we're able to not to pause, but to have a major check-in of where we've come from and where we're at, so that we can harvest that and offer that both into the Summit of the Future in whatever way is possible, but much more so into that ongoing coalition of the willing building as we move forward. And you know, I look back before World Unity Week began and how far we've come in these last few years. And I honestly think we're just getting started. So I look to far, far more of us sharing, growing, coming together to become co-evolutionary partners of our beloved Gaia's evolutionary purpose, and the joy of that and the adventure of that. So I love it is an emergent process. I'm really grateful that part of the wisdom that that Joni spoke of is a willingness to not know. And that is, I feel, where we are, because when we don't know, we're open to the possibilities that are so far greater than anything we might actually know at this stage.
Yes, 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 yes. And that would be my parting words is, we know there's a lot of crap going on. Don't stand
Of
in
course.
just don't stand in not knowing anymore. You know, we're
Absolutely.
spending too much time letting that define the conversation. Stand in the knowing that we are set up for a peaceful world of one family, that we are a stand for uniting. We are already united. We are a stand for waking up to the unity that we already share. And we are standing in the consciousness of peace, interconnectedness, of love, all the things we're talking about. And I would encourage you, as parting words, as the thoughts creep in of fighting and pushing and demanding and striking, all those kinds of things, that's another paradigm. Right now, it's stand in the confidence of knowing that there is a strong coalition of the willing. It's growing. We're connecting at levels at the United Nations and all other places. So stand in that being. Allow that to be your ground.
I love that. And know too that we literally are inseparable. So when we see others that are not in this place, not to blame or shame or condone or condemn, but appreciate that the better song we sing enables everyone to wake up and join the choir of that song and the potential of its promise.
And sing in that choir.
Sing.
Don't worry if you keep tune. Don't worry about all those things. Just make some joyful noise.
Sing and dance.
Woohoo! All right, that finishes us up for today. Beautiful. Thank you, and good morning, good night, and good afternoon, where we are.
Thank
Love
you, Clara. Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you, Mark, for being our wonderful tech genius. And thanks, everyone, for being part of this wondrous adventure.
I fell. Oh, enjoy. Okay, now we have the co-creation circle coming up next.